Hello everyone, my name is Suzanne Sabri. I am an assistant lecturer at the Department of Sociology in French-Lebanese University. For the subject Sociological Concept, I have prepared this online PowerPoint. Today's lecture is about the minority groups. So let's start with the definition of minority group. In sociology, a minority group refers to a category of people who experience relative disadvantage as compared to members of a dominant social group. So we can say, however, that minority groups can also be defined in other different ways. Another way to define minority group is that a minority group is a subordinate group whose members are significantly less control or in power over their own lives than the members of a dominant or majority group. However, minority means the same as subordinate, and the dominant group is used interchangeably with majority. So you have to imagine you have in community groups, or in society you have groups, and one can be seen as minority and the other one as majority. In a society you can have more of those minority groups. So let's look at the characteristic of minority groups. What makes you a minority group? Well, a minority group have many characteristics, but according to Charles Wigley and Marvin Lars, two scholars in social science, they have divided minor groups in 5 characteristics. The first one is they say that one of the characteristics of minor group is that there is an unequal treatment and less power of their own lives. The second characteristic is that they are being divided physically or culturally traits like skin color or language. Involuntary membership in a group can be seen as their third characteristic. The fourth one is the awareness of subordination. And the fifth one is that the high rate of an in-group marriage. Additionally, examples of minority groups might also include the LGBT community, the religious practitioners whose faith is not widely practiced where they live, and people, for example, with disabilities. Intergroup relations. So, what do I mean with intergroup relations? Often in a society you have, as I said before, minority groups and majority groups. The majority groups can also be defined as dominant group. The dominant group is often the group in a society who hold the position of power, and they establish the values and norms to benefit themselves. For example, they enjoy certain privileges such as better housing, education, higher income, etc. The opposite of it, so against the dominant group you have the minority group. Those are often a group of people that are singled out or treated unequally because of their physical characteristic or cultural practices. Be aware, minority does not refer to the size of a group, but again, it had to do of unequally treated because of their physical characteristics or cultural practice. Here you can see an example of the dominant group in South Africa was white South Africans, who made up 50% of the population. And the other percent, the 85%, were the black Africans. But in the same time, you can see that the dominant group were the group with a less size. I will give you an example of the minority groups in America because I don't have statistic numbers of the minority groups in Kurdistan region. So we're gonna focus on America so that I can elaborate on the minority groups. I will start with a theory. You can call it the American dilemma. The American dilemma, we can talk about that. It is a theory, or you can say a concept, that is developed by Gunnar Myrdal. Gunnar Myrdal was a sociologist, and he came with this theory because he was writing about the psychologically and the cultural conflict that many Americans faced. The American dilemma is the gap between what Americans claim to believe and how they actually behave. Basically, the American claim that they believe in equality and fair treatment of all citizens. But the actions of Americans contradict this claim, and I will explain to you in some statistics in the next slide. Before we're going to talk about the some examples of minority groups and how they have been treated in America, let's look at where it starts, and that is, then we have to look at the American history. In the American history, we have the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, who actually their values and norm became in America the ones that you have to follow. The minority, you can also see that the minority with the greatest success were the ones that adapted to the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants' expectations. So, and often one of the groups who were adapting to the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants' value and norms were the Western Europeans. The Western Europeans were often the ones who assimilate quickly and prospered, while other groups were not. So let's look to some examples of the minority groups in America. First one, we're going to look at to the African Americans. One of the largest minority group in America are the African Americans. They exist of 40%. They face more prejudice and discrimination than other minority groups in America. However, they started to make major social gains over the past 60 years. For example, they started with the civil rights and other movement, black movement, and all kind of social gains that happens during the last years. Um, Other facts that we have or that we can find about them is that, for example, that 64% of the Black American or African American are graduated from high school. And the average income is $32,000 yearly. And if you compare it with the Americans, it's less, because an average income of a white American family is $45,000. Another fact is also that 68% of white American kids make more money than their parents, while African American kids make 31% more money than their parents. So you can see a very huge difference. That means that the white American get more opportunities than African Americans. Another fact is that 28% of African Americans are living in poverty, while only 10% of white Americans are living in poverty in America. So, what are or who are the other minority groups in America? Another minority group in America are the Latinos, or you can say the Latina Americans. They exist of 70% of them. And then you have the Asian Americans. They exist of 5%. And then you have Native Americans. Those are the original citizens of America, and you can call them also non-white Americans. And then you have the white ethnics. These are the European immigrants from Italy, France, Poland, and Greece. However, all in all, we can say that these minority groups still face huge discrimination from the majority white Americans. So, for example, if we look at the white ethnics, you have in America, like the Asian town, you have the Italian city. So what you have is those minority groups, they create an in-group. They stay in their own group. They don't adapt the values and norms of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That's why the step to grow or to be successful, it's less than other groups who do that. For example, I explained that the Western European, they're adapting very quickly. So if you compare that with each other, you will see a huge difference in that. What do we have learned today? We can summarize that as the minority groups actually are being defined by their lack of power. Again, you have to be careful with that. If you talk about minority group, you are not talking about a less size or huger size of people in a community. Often it had to do with the characteristics. So after I have explained about the minority group, assignment for the students, I want you all to write for me one page about the minority groups that we have in the Kurdistan region. And it will be very interesting if you also talk about their characteristics, and very important that you also talk about how are these majority groups being treated by the majority groups in Kurdistan and who are the majority groups in Kurdistan. The assignment must be finished for next week. The deadline is next week Friday, 12 o'clock. I will also put the assignment on Edmodo so that you guys can read again and give your reflection or your feedback about it. Time, and we will see you next week again.